I wasn't expecting much when Eric called. Just another polite check-in, maybe a short reminder about watering the plants or locking the back door twice. That's how it's been for years now, safe, distant, surface level. So when his voice softened and he said, "Mom, we want you to come with us this year," I had to steady myself on the kitchen counter. After all these years of being the one left behind, the one who kept the fridge stocked and the porch light on, suddenly I was being invited, not to help, not to babysit, not to clean, but to go, to be part of something. I didn't realize how much I'd been waiting for that sentence until it arrived. The call came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sun pools on the hardwood floor just right, and the silence of the house feels more like a hum than an absence. I was drying a glass with the dish towel I always keep slung over my shoulder, humming an old Simon and Garfunkel tune, when the phone rang. Eric's name lit up on the screen, and as always, my heart did that little flutter it had never quite forgotten. He started with small talk. How the renovations were coming along, how Melinda's podcast had finally hit 10,000 listeners, how the neighbor's dog kept digging up their lawn. I smiled, nodded along even though he couldn't see it because that's what mothers do. And then, with a pause so deliberate it nearly creaked through the line, he said, "We want you to come on the trip this year, Mom, the Bahamas, whole family, just us." I didn't speak for a moment. I couldn't. It had been over a decade since I'd been invited to anything more than Thanksgiving dinner or the occasional birthday brunch where I was expected to arrive early to help with the prep. But this was different. This was a real vacation, one with airline tickets and hotel rooms and sunscreen, one where I wasn't just the background presence keeping things running smoothly. I was being asked to join, like family. "Oh, Eric," I whispered, hand trembling slightly as I sat at the kitchen table. "Are you sure?" "Of course," he said, a little too quickly. "We've been meaning to do something like this for a while now. You deserve a break. We want you there." I told him I'd love to. I meant it. And after we hung up, I sat there for a long time, just listening to the ticking of the wall clock and the sound of the wind brushing past the front porch. I felt seen. Not in a grand way, but in that small, vital way we all crave. Like I still mattered to him. Like I wasn't just the woman who changed his diapers and drove him to band practice and stayed up all night when he had a fever that wouldn't break. Like I was more than a memory, more than an obligation. The next morning, I took the bus to the mall. I haven't bought myself anything new in years, not since Richard passed. But that day, I found a lovely cream-colored linen dress, soft to the touch and loose in all the right places. It made me look hopeful somehow. I bought a sun hat too, one with a little ribbon on the side. I scheduled a haircut for the following week and even splurged on a light pink nail polish that reminded me of the color I wore the day Richard proposed. Each evening, I'd sit by the window in my bedroom, watching the sky darken over the maple trees in the yard. I imagined the warm sand under my feet, the sound of laughter over dinner, and the breeze carrying the scent of ocean salt and blooming hibiscus. I imagined Eric turning to Melinda and saying, "Doesn't Mom look great?" And for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I was part of their picture again. I spent hours rereading the email with the flight details. I checked the weather in Nassau, printed boarding passes, bought travel-size shampoo bottles. Every time I passed by the hallway mirror, I found myself standing straighter, smiling. I wasn't just going on a trip, I was stepping back into the frame, into their lives, into who I used to be. Or maybe who I was always supposed to be. And then came the moment that pulled the air right out of my lungs. The night I pulled out an old scrapbook from the closet, looking for a photo to pack. Inside were images of a life full of giving. Eric as a baby, Eric at his graduation, Eric on his wedding day. In every photo, I was behind the camera or standing just off to the side, holding a coat or adjusting someone's collar. Always helping. Always there, always invisible. That scrapbook reminded me that love had never been transactional for me. I gave because I wanted to, because I believed in family. But somewhere along the way, what I gave became expected. My support, my time, my house, even my silence. It was as if motherhood was a job I never clocked out of, a role I was never allowed to age out of. Still, I brushed that heaviness aside. This trip was different. I told myself that over and over. I needed it to be different. I needed it to be a moment of reconnection, of renewal. I'd heard enough revenge story podcasts from Melinda's show to know some mothers hit their breaking point. But I wasn't bitter. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted to be loved like I loved, to be included without asking, to matter. As the day of the trip approached, I placed my small suitcase by the door. I double-checked the lights, made sure the mail would be held, even baked a batch of muffins to bring on the flight. Blueberry, Eric's favorite. I laid the dress across my bed the night before, pressed and folded, ready to wear. When I looked at it, I didn't just see fabric. I saw hope sewn into every seam, and for the first time in years, I fell asleep with a smile on my face. Not because someone had praised me or needed me or remembered what I'd done, but because I believed, however quietly, that I was finally being wanted. The morning of the flight, I woke up before the sun. My body was alert, ready, as if it had been waiting for this day longer than I realized. I took a slow shower, letting the warm water settle my nerves, then slipped into the cream-colored dress I had ironed the night before. It still smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I keep tucked into my dresser drawers. My suitcase was already packed, standing like a little soldier by the front door. I even made coffee for the road, pouring it into the travel mug Eric had given me years ago. It had a faded picture of the two of us on a Ferris wheel when he was 13, grinning like fools. I smiled at it, hopeful. Maybe this trip would be our way back. The cab ride to the airport was smooth. The driver chatted about the weather, the rising cost of airport parking, how expensive everything was these days. I nodded along politely, my mind already 1,000 miles ahead. On white sand beaches, shared dinners, family photos. I imagined Melinda snapping a picture of me and Eric on the balcony, me with my sun hat, him with that old grin I hadn't seen in years. When I arrived at the terminal, I spotted them almost immediately. Eric in his blue sport coat, Melinda in white linen pants and gold sunglasses perched on her head. She was standing beside a younger woman I didn't recognize, whispering something with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Eric was on his phone, typing fast, as if the world couldn't wait. I waved. "Morning!" I called, walking toward them. Eric looked up. His expression didn't shift. No smile. No warmth, just neutral. He nodded slightly and walked over to me, leaving Melinda and the other woman behind. "Mom," he said quietly, "hey, can we talk for a second?" My heart dropped just enough to notice. I forced a smile. "Of course. Q." He led me toward a row of empty chairs near the edge of the terminal, just far enough for some privacy, just close enough that Melinda could keep an eye on us from where she stood. "There's been a change," he started, looking down at his shoes, "about the trip." "What kind of change?" I asked, though my stomach had already started to sink. He took a breath, glanced up, and said it. "Chelsea is coming instead." I blinked. "What?" "Melinda thought it would be better. Someone closer to our lifestyle, our energy. They've got a few networking events planned on the island and thought, well, you might not be comfortable with that kind of scene." I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He added quickly, "It's not personal, it's just, we thought it was best." Melinda walked up just then, holding out a boarding pass, Chelsea's name printed clearly across the top. She smiled that same tight-lipped smile. "Thank you for understanding, Eloise. You know how exhausting trips can be at your age. Maybe you could water the plants while we're gone. I left a list on the fridge. And if you have time, just a little tidy up in the kitchen would be wonderful." I took the boarding pass without meaning to. My hand just closed around it. Like a reflex, like muscle memory. Like the part of me that had spent decades cleaning up messes and covering up hurt didn't quite know how to stop. They turned to leave, pulling their sleek luggage behind them, laughing at something Chelsea had said. I stood there just outside the rhythm of their lives, suitcase in hand, dress fluttering against my legs in the breeze of passing travelers. I didn't follow them. I couldn't. Instead, I walked out of the terminal in a daze and called for a cab. The ride home was silent. Even the driver didn't say a word. I clutched my travel mug with both hands, the old photo of Eric and me now pressed against my chest like a lie I didn't know I had believed for too long. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. The house was exactly as I had left it. Clean, quiet, still holding that faint scent of lemon cleaner I'd used the day before. I set my suitcase down by the stairs and just stood there. For minutes, maybe more. Then I walked to the kitchen, where sure enough, Melinda's list was taped neatly to the fridge. Water the plants, check the mail, wipe down the countertops, run the dishwasher, like I was the help, like I had no purpose beyond what was convenient for them. I stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, I reached up and peeled it off. I didn't crumple it or tear it immediately. I just held it in my hand, letting the paper rest against my palm like the years I'd given them. Soft, expected, invisible. Then I ripped it. One strip at a time, until the pieces fluttered to the floor like confetti from a celebration I was never invited to. And right here, if you've ever stood in your own kitchen, holding back tears that had nothing to do with the words being said, but everything to do with the silence behind them, then you know this moment. You know this ache, and I hope you stayed. Because this isn't just a story about being forgotten. It's about what happens next. I didn't cry, not then, not yet. I just sat on the edge of the couch, the cream-colored dress still clinging to me like it wanted to be part of something I no longer believed in. I opened my phone, scrolled to our last message thread and typed, "Have a good trip, Eric." Then I powered it off. There was no reply, but I hadn't expected one. I sat there in the silence, trying to remember the exact moment I stopped being someone to them. The moment I turned into background. Eventually, I climbed the stairs, loosened the dress from my shoulders, and hung it on the back of the door. I didn't put it away. I didn't change out of it. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was just how life would go from here. Muted, overlooked, erased. But I didn't know then that something else was waiting for me in the dark, and it would change everything. I didn't leave the house the next day, or the day after that. The cream-colored dress hung like a ghost from the back of the bedroom door, its fabric slowly losing the shape of the body that had carried so much hope. I couldn't bring myself to put it back in the closet or fold it away. It felt like doing so would mean admitting it had never had a purpose at all. Instead, I moved through the house like someone walking through someone else's life. The stillness felt different now, not peaceful, empty, like every silence was filled with a question I was too tired to answer. Like every creak in the floorboards was the echo of something I thought I had earned, but never truly received. For the first day, I went through the motions, made tea, fed the cat that wasn't mine but came to the porch every morning, wiped down the counters even though they were already clean. But by the second day, I stopped. I let the dust sit where it fell. I let the mug in the sink stay there overnight. I didn't open the blinds. I didn't want the sun watching me. There was something about being replaced so easily, so cleanly, that does more than hurt. It rewrites you. It takes all the moments you stayed up with a sick child, every time you said no to yourself so they could have yes, and it erases them in one polite smile and a list on the fridge. I couldn't stop hearing Melinda's voice in my head. "It's just more your pace to stay behind, Eloise." As if I was nothing more than an afterthought with a watering can. As if years of loving them hadn't carved canyons inside me. I started sleeping on the couch, not because my bed wasn't comfortable, but because it felt too far away from the version of me who still believed I was included. It sat there like a reminder that someone had once said, "You deserve this trip," only to turn and hand that same seat to a stranger. Everywhere I looked in the house, there were little reminders of the version of me I used to be, the one who smiled too quickly, who made herself small to fit into other people's stories. There was the apron I wore every Thanksgiving, still neatly folded in the bottom drawer, The photo on the mantle of Eric as a baby in my arms, back when I was his whole world. Now I wasn't even in his weekend plans. And the silence. Oh, the silence. It was the kind that doesn't soothe. It was the kind that makes the walls feel closer every hour, like the house is watching you wait for someone who won't come. The silence held every unspoken thank you, every Mother's Day call that never came, every time I was asked to clean up after a dinner I didn't eat. I tried not to cry, because crying felt like giving them another piece of me. But some nights it still came, slow and bitter, the kind of tears that stain the insides more than the outside. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not even Delilah, my oldest friend, the one who would have said, "Honey, they don't know what they're missing." Because that wasn't the point. The point was they didn't care what they were missing. They didn't even think I was worth the space on a flight. That realization hit me hardest when I opened the fridge on the third day and saw a container of grapes I'd bought specifically because Melinda liked them. I had planned to pack them for the flight. I stared at them for a long time, then shut the door without touching a thing. It wasn't just about being left behind, it was that I had been expected to stay behind. Expected to smile and nod and say, "Of course, sweetheart," when told I'd been replaced. Expected to still care for their house, their plants, their needs, as if I had no needs of my own. It was the expectation that hurt most, that unspoken assumption that I would just fade. So I stopped. I stopped answering texts, not that many came. I stopped refreshing the weather in the Bahamas. I stopped picturing the trip I thought we'd share. I didn't even open the suitcase again. It sat by the stairs like a monument to the version of me that believed inclusion was just one more sacrifice away. And then, one sleepless night, I found myself standing at the edge of the hallway closet. It wasn't something I planned. My body just walked there, while my mind still drifted in pain. I opened the closet door slowly, mechanically, and there it was. The old cedar box Richard had left me the year before he passed. It had sat untouched for over a decade. I had always assumed it held papers, maybe old tax returns or photos I didn't have the heart to look through. But that night, something in me shifted. Some small, tired part of me whispered, "Look." I pulled it out carefully, the wood cool against my hands. It was heavier than I remembered. Underneath, taped to the bottom, was a small silver key. I sat at the dining table, still in my cream dress, still barefoot, and unlocked it. Inside were envelopes, folders, and a letter. On top, in Richard's handwriting, was my name. Just Eloise. Not Mom. Not Honey. Just me. I didn't open it yet. I just stared at it for a moment, letting the weight of the day, the week, the years settle across my shoulders. For the first time in so long, I felt something flicker. Not hope, not yet, but a quiet invitation to remember that I had a name before I was someone's mother, a voice before I was someone's afterthought, a life that had once been mine. I picked up the letter, and I read. The letter was handwritten, familiar loops and slants, unmistakably Richard's. Just seeing his handwriting again made my throat tighten. He always had a steadiness in the way he wrote, like every word mattered, like he was talking straight to you, even on paper. I unfolded it carefully, the pages smooth and warm from resting in the box all these years. My name was at the top. Not Dear Eloise, not my love, just Eloise. Like he was speaking to me, not a role I played. If you're reading this, I'm no longer here. And that thought still doesn't sit well with me, even though I've made peace with it. There's something I never told you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I feared the world wouldn't let you have it without trying to take it from you. I paused, heart beginning to stir. I read on. The airline, Suncrest, it wasn't sold. I inherited it from my father, and though the world believed we folded or merged, we didn't. I kept it quiet, grew it slowly, and now it's yours. I blinked, reading that sentence 3 times before it made sense. Yes, Yours. Every share, every asset, every plane. I set up the transfers long ago. Marcus Klein is the CEO now. He knows everything. There's another envelope in this box with the legal details, access codes, and contact information. He's waiting for your call. I sat back in my chair, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. It felt like someone had just opened a window in a room I didn't know I was trapped inside. This isn't a gift for them to use, Eloise. This isn't a safety net for Eric. This is for you, for your freedom, for the years you spent making sure everyone else could fly while you stayed grounded. You've earned every part of it. By the time I finished reading, my hands were steady. In the second envelope were official documents, stamped, signed, all bearing my full name. I was the registered majority shareholder of Suncrest Airlines. I owned 62% of the company. My signature sat on papers I didn't remember signing. My husband had handled it all, tucked it away like a secret treasure meant to be opened only when I truly needed it. And somehow, I knew. This was that moment. I didn't waste time. My fingers moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed in Richard's letter. Marcus Klein. A calm voice answered on the second ring. Yes, I said. This is Eloise Adler. My husband left me your name. He said you'd be expecting my call. There was a pause, and then the voice shifted. It warmed, became still. We've been waiting for you, Marcus said gently. By noon, I was sitting in a bright, high-ceilinged office in downtown Chicago, just off Michigan Avenue. The receptionist had called me Mrs. Adler, with a tone I hadn't heard in years, one that carried respect, not obligation. I wore gray slacks and a soft blue sweater. No makeup, no jewelry. And yet I had never felt more present in a room. Marcus stood to greet me, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, thoughtful eyes. Mrs. Adler, he said, extending his hand with a firm, quiet dignity. It's an honor. He walked me through everything, how Richard had gradually bought back silent shares under a different holding company, how the board had been kept intentionally small, how Suncrest had evolved into a boutique airline for business and luxury travelers, stable and profitable. You own it outright, Marcus said. Every decision is yours. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with all this, I admitted. That's entirely up to you, he said. But your husband asked me to guide you should you ever choose to step in. Not take over, but step in, on your own terms. I looked down at the binder in front of me. Quarterly reports, asset ledgers, long-term growth plans, and my name at the top of every page. Eloise Adler, owner, chairwoman, shareholder of record. It didn't feel like winning something. It felt like remembering who I was before I disappeared. I sat quietly for a while, watching the light play across the table. Then I cleared my throat. Eric and his wife, they're flying Suncrest right now, flight 328 to the Bahamas. Marcus looked mildly surprised. First class? Of course, I said. He nodded slowly. What would you like me to do? I want the captain to make a brief announcement, I said. Just my name. Not a confrontation, just presence. I can arrange that, he said. We'll patch it through air traffic. No problem. We stood. He walked me to the elevator. Oh, I added as I reached the door. One more thing. I'd like to review the corporate records of the Adler Family Investment Fund. My son has been using it to secure a personal business loan. I'd like that authorization revoked. Marcus didn't blink. Understood. We'll notify the bank today the loan will lose its collateral protection. Good, I said, stepping into the elevator. Let's see how well he flies without my wings beneath him. As the doors closed, I looked at my reflection in the elevator mirror, not polished, not glamorous, but there, solid, came returned. Back home that evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sky bleed into twilight. Somewhere up in that sky, my son was sitting in first class, champagne in hand, wife beside him, thinking he had left me behind. He didn't know yet what he'd hear in just a few minutes. The announcement came 20 minutes after takeoff. Somewhere high above the Gulf, inside the plush quiet of Suncrest Airlines Flight 328, a calm voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to extend a special welcome to Mrs. Eloise Adler, majority shareholder of Suncrest Airlines. Her vision continues to guide our journey, and it is an honor to have her name flying with us today. It was brief, polished, professional, but it did exactly what I knew it would. Eric's back stiffened at the sound of my name. He was mid-sip, holding a glass of sparkling wine. Melinda froze. Her fork hovered just above a tray of fresh fruit, her expression confused at first, then guarded. Chelsea leaned forward from the seat across the aisle, whispering, "Wait, is your mom here?" Eric didn't respond. He stared straight ahead. I wasn't on the plane. I didn't need to be. I was sitting in a quiet corner office of the Suncrest building, legs crossed, a cup of black coffee going cold in my hand. I looked out the window at the skyline and imagined them trying to figure it out. Who I was, what I knew, what it meant. But mostly, I imagined the silence between them after the announcement. That heavy, uncomfortable silence that follows when people realize they've misjudged someone for far too long. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. And in that stillness, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Room to breathe. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I wasn't trying to fit into their vacations, their timelines, their curated lives. I had stepped out of the frame entirely. The next morning, I woke up early, not from anxiety, but from clarity. I made myself eggs, toasted a bagel, sat at the table and ate without rushing. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for an apology. Instead, I picked up a yellow legal pad from the drawer and began jotting notes. Ideas, phrases, names. One in particular stood out, "Still here." A few months ago, it would have felt silly, me dreaming up something bigger than myself. But now, with my hands no longer full of other people's needs, I felt a quiet urgency, a project, a purpose. Still here would be a foundation for women like me, women who'd been pushed aside, silenced, made to feel invisible after a lifetime of giving. A place for them to reconnect, not just with each other, but with themselves. There would be workshops, shared meals, travel grants. But more than that, it would be proof. Proof that we don't disappear when our children stop calling, that our lives don't lose value after 60, that dignity doesn't end with gray hair and silence. I called Delilah later that afternoon. She'd always been the friend who listened without trying to fix. I told her everything, from the flight to the letter to the boardroom. There was a pause on the line. Then she let out a long exhale. "It's about time, Eloise. You were always the engine. They just never looked under the hood." That night, I took a walk around the neighborhood. The air was cool, leaves crackling underfoot. I passed houses I'd known for decades, windows glowing with other people's dinners, other people's laughter, and for once, I didn't feel like I was missing something. I felt whole. Not flashy, not loud, just whole. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. The next few days passed gently. No sudden calls, no emergencies, just space. I used it well. I met with a nonprofit consultant, rented a small office space downtown, hired a local designer to work on a logo. Still, here started to take shape, not as a revenge story, but as a reclamation. I wasn't rising from the ashes. I had never been burnt. I had simply been buried under the weight of expectation, and now I was digging myself out. By the end of the week, Eric finally texted, "Mom, is it true? About the airline?" I waited a few minutes before replying. "Yes, I found out the morning you left for the trip." Another message followed quickly. "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at the screen for a long time, then typed back, "You never asked." He didn't reply, at least not right away. And I didn't need him to, because that's what real peace feels like, not a grand speech or a public reckoning, just knowing. Knowing that the version of me they once overlooked had always been real, and she no longer needed their invitation to exist. A few days later, I received a letter from the bank, formal confirmation that Eric's business loan had lost its collateral. I didn't call him. I didn't ask what would happen next. That wasn't my burden anymore. I had given my life to helping other people stay afloat. This time, I was building something of my own. That weekend, I went with Delilah to a local cafe that hosted open mics for writers over 60. We sat in the back, sipped coffee, and listened to stories, real stories, told in the voices of women who had lived entire novels inside their homes. At one point, a woman stood up, maybe in her late 70s, and read a poem titled, "I Am Not Done Yet." Her voice was shaking but strong. Every woman in the room sat forward, as if gathering every word into their chest. I felt it too. That spark, that truth. I wasn't done yet either. Paris was softer than I remembered. I'd been once, years ago with Richard, an anniversary trip filled with camera flashes and tourist lines. But this time, I walked slower. I noticed the curve of doorways, the way sunlight stretched across rooftops, the smell of warm bread curling out of tiny boulangeries. This time, I wasn't tagging along on someone else's itinerary. I was moving at my own pace. Delilah and I sat at a cafe in the 7th arrondissement, just far enough from the Eiffel Tower that it wasn't flooded with tourists. The coffee was strong, the croissants flaked just right, and for once, my thoughts weren't circling around who needed what from me. They just settled. That morning, an email had landed quietly in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Mom." I don't know how to say this. I've been thinking about everything, about the airport, the flight, what I said or didn't say. I was wrong. Melinda was wrong. I see that now. I don't expect anything from you. But I have to ask, can you ever forgive me? I read it twice. Not because I didn't know how I felt, but because I wanted to feel more than I did. I searched for anger, for that old ache. But what I found instead was distance. Not cruelty, not indifference, just peace. I replied after lunch, "I already have, Eric, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It just means I no longer carry what you did. My hands are full now with something else." I closed my phone and slipped it into my bag. Then I reached for my glass and clinked it softly against Delilah's. She smiled without asking anything. That's the kind of friend she is. She doesn't pry. She trusts you to open when you're ready. Over the next week, we wandered through bookshops and street markets, sat on stone benches and listened to violinists, talked with women who'd lived their own quiet revolutions. Some had been nurses, some mothers, some widows. One woman, a retired librarian from New York, told me, "It's like I disappeared the minute no one needed me anymore." I understood her too well. By the time we landed in Santorini a week later, Still Here had launched its website. The first retreat was scheduled for the fall, in Vermont, where the leaves would burn gold and women would gather not to perform, but to be. We had 30 sign-ups by the end of the first day. By day 3, we had to create a wait list. I hadn't thought I'd feel anything watching it grow. I figured it would be quiet satisfaction, maybe a little pride, but it was something bigger. It felt like every inch of silence I'd endured had suddenly bloomed into sound. Not loud, but rich, steady, like a chorus of women stepping out of invisibility, one at a time. We never mentioned Eric and Melinda again, not in anger, not in longing, just not at all. That part of my story had ended, or maybe it had simply stopped needing to be told. One night, at a rooftop dinner in Montmartre, a woman with silver hair and bright eyes leaned across the table and asked, "Do you think it's too late for someone like me to start over?" I looked at her for a long moment, then took her hand. "The day you believe in your own worth is the day your life begins again, and that day can be today." She nodded slowly, and I watched something shift behind her eyes. A weight lifting, a page turning. As I watched her walk away later that night, shoulders straighter than when she arrived, I realized something about my own story. This was never about the flight, not really, not about the dress, or the suitcase, or the words they said to excuse my exclusion. It was about a woman who had once been erased, and then quietly rewrote herself. Eric never followed up on his email. Maybe he's still trying to figure out what changed. Maybe he's still hoping for a phone call that won't come. I don't hate him for it. I just no longer need him to see me in order for me to exist. I've learned that you don't have to burn bridges to find freedom. Sometimes you just stop walking back across them. Now, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a mother left behind. I see a woman who gave everything and then, finally, gave something to herself. I don't want revenge. I don't want a reunion. I want this. The silence, the sunlight, the second act, mine. If you've ever felt replaced, unseen, or quietly erased by the very people you once gave everything to, tell me, what did you do to find yourself again? I'd love to hear your story below. You never know who might need to hear it.